Welcome to Carousel. I'm your host, Marcelle Soviero, and tonight we're going to hop on the carousel as we do every week to talk to interesting people about interesting things. Tonight I'm so delighted to have with us Randi Olin, who is the managing editor of Brainchild, the magazine for thinking mothers, and also the managing editor of that magazine's blog, Brain Mother, which is an award-winning blog for which she runs and is also the lead writer. Welcome, Randi.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So tell us, you are now an editor of a large magazine, but you started in a very different area. You began in law, I think. So tell us how you got into writing. And
well, I was a lawyer in New York City. When I went to law school in the city, I met my husband there, and we lived there for a little while. We both practiced law in the city. Then I became pregnant. I did continue practicing for a little bit, but I decided to take some time off to spend time with my baby, which I did, and I enjoyed that very much. So I decided to stay home full time. So I was a full-time mom, I had another child, and I did do some writing on the side. And I was lucky enough to find a great center, Westport Writers Workshop, to take some classes. You and I met there. We were in a class together.
That's right.
Writing and reading our work. And you bought the magazine in 2012. And I basically reached out to you and said, do you need help? And you said...
And we did.
Sure.
Absolutely.
And here we are.
And here we are. So, but in addition to Brainchild and being an editor and all of that, you've become a recognized writer, an award-winning writer. And tell us a little bit about, you have 2 children, and they were younger when you started writing, and now here we are. So tell us how it's been to sort of build a writing career around having young children and now teenagers.
Well, actually, writing with teens seems a little bit easier than writing with little kids. One of the reasons, I think, is just little kids demand more every moment of your time, and my teens seem to be, luckily, more independent. Also, with respect to the material and the topics, I find that a lot of the topics and themes when the children were little were more universal, whereas now that they're teens, they kind of each have their stories along the way, and that gives for a lot of writing material.
So I think our viewers would think, what's it like to write about your small children versus what is it like to write about your teenage children? Did you read to the kids when you were publishing something about them when they were young, and do you read to them now that you publish something about them when they're older?
That's an interesting question, because what I do is actually I usually send a link to my daughter via Facebook.
Of course.
And that's how I let her know that I've written something about her and I would like her to read it. Or
do you mean it's already published?
Yes, it's already published. I don't share my work with my family before it's published. I will ask them if it is okay for me to write about a particular incident or experience. And as long as I have their okay, I'm comfortable enough with what I am willing to reveal about the experience or our personal family life. And so far that has not been a problem.
So that's interesting. And so now you spend a lot of your time reading so many submissions from women who are writing about their children and dealing with all the facets of raising children. How do you decide what you want to publish and what you don't from hundreds of submissions?
Well, usually it's the author's voice or the writing style of the author that really catches my attention. Obviously, a polished essay is something that we're always looking for, but I'm also looking for an essay or a story that sort of has a beginning and has an end to it. I want there to be some sort of insight, or I want to learn something. I don't only want to read about someone's experience. So oftentimes that really becomes very obvious when you're reading hundreds of submissions on a weekly basis. Those essays really seem to stick out.
The ones that have an insight related
Yes.
to a certain, so you may get a lot of submissions and women writing about perhaps infertility or breastfeeding or whatever, and then you find the one that has a real insight or that's really different.
Or it's talking about a familiar subject, but it's giving a new angle, or
Sure.
something I haven't thought about before, or it's told in a different type of way. Those are the pieces that really stand out.
Okay, so we're in the age of the internet, and Brainchild has been around since 2000, so we're 15 years in publishing. But the world has gone online, and the world has gone to blogs and mommy blogs, or women and moms writing. So tell us a little bit how you make the blog for Brainchild different.
Well, one of the major differences for the Brainchild blog is that every single piece is edited. And I think that's a distinguishing factor. While there are so many well-written pieces and essays on the topic of mothering and parenting in the blogosphere, or I don't know if that's the proper term, but I think it is, there are very few sites that actually edit every single piece that goes up on the site. So I think that's a distinguishing factor. A lot of our pieces are also a little bit more literary than you'll find on other blogs. There's no how-to, there's no top 10 list for the most part. Once in a while, if we're running a humorous piece, we might dabble in a different type of format, an interview, a song, something lyrical,
Right.
but typically we actually don't do that.
What is the popularity with, I don't even like to call it a mommy blog, but for blogs for moms, why are there so many now? Why do you think?
I think a lot of it has to do with social media and the internet and just the ability to share pieces with friends, with family. I do it all the time, and perhaps it's because I'm reading all day
All the
long,
time.
all the time. I often find pieces, I'll send them to a friend, I'll send them to a family member, and maybe they'll share it along the way, whether it's via Facebook or even via email. I think there's a lot of sharing. And the universal themes of motherhood, they really do resonate no matter how old your kids are.
Isn't that interesting? So whether your children are just born to whether they're going off to college, there's so much there, but everybody sort of gets it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or wants to know it.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely, yeah.
What are your challenges as an editor of, I think, what's pretty much the largest literary magazine in the country? What sort of challenges are there? Do you have to select from a number of submissions? What's the challenge?
I think there are a couple of challenges. One simply is finding the right pieces. Especially for the blog, we are looking for a nice balance of topics and themes, and sometimes you might get a lot of very, very strong submissions that aren't necessarily what you need at the right time. So sometimes that is a challenge, sort of finding the right balance and mix of voices and perspectives in a given week. Another challenge can be sort of, are we newsy enough sometimes? Or thinking, are we edgy enough? Or should we be thinking in other directions? I think that's a challenge too, sort of always trying to stay new and fresh and keeping it up to date and
Right.
not getting too comfortable in what we've been doing on a daily basis.
How do you think Do you think dads are reading these blogs as much as moms?
I don't think they're reading them as much, but I do think they're reading them.
They're reading them.
We're lucky enough to have dads who write for the magazine. I read a lot of pieces that come in as submissions, but also on other sites that are written by dads. I love reading the dad perspective. I find it fascinating. So we are always open to publishing pieces by fathers, but I do think primarily I do notice that there are more mother writers and readers out there.
And we run this magazine together,
We do.
Of course. And what do you feel are the topics that people are most interested in as moms?
That is a very interesting question because I think it changes a lot.
It does.
You know, sometimes I think it's the flawed mother perspective. You know, everybody wants to believe that perfection is either not possible or overrated. And so that theme seems to really resonate. We've run blog series such as blog series on adoption, on LGBT families, and those two series were very well received. And you know, sometimes an unexpected sort of theme will really resonate, and we will start considering, oh, okay, perhaps we should open up our minds to more pieces perhaps in that area.
Which is interesting because one of the things we try to do is showcase families of different backgrounds, different circumstances, because do you see from submissions that perhaps families are all different?
Yes, and actually one of my favorite things, in addition to working with the writers, which I love so much, is reading the submissions. Even the ones that we ultimately choose not to accept for publication, I do find it really fascinating, the stories that people have to tell and where they come from and what their experience is, and the fact that they're willing to share it with us.
Yeah, absolutely. So you hear and read a lot of heartwarming, really serious writing from moms. How is that for you in terms of your own writing?
Well, the reading a lot definitely helps my writing, and oftentimes what I know I like to read sort of gives me hints in my own writing, places that I can improve, or things that are working or our readers are enjoying. So I think all of the reading that I do and all of the editing that I do does seem to help me in my writing.
In your own insight.
Correct.
And what you're working
What
on.
a piece needs.
So we have a lot of viewers, I'm sure, tonight who are interested in their moms and they may want to write. What's some of the advice you have for, you have 2 children, right? So how did you do it? When they were young and now they're older and you wanted to write about your children, how did that all come about?
My biggest piece of advice would be to keep a journal. And I actually just had this conversation with somebody today. He was telling me that he likes to write and that he sort of pecks away at his computer. And we sort of talked about the idea of bringing a journal with him, either on the train, or he takes a lot of family vacations on the airplane, that sometimes the thoughts might come into your mind and you get the 15 minutes when you least expect it. You're traveling with your child, he falls asleep on the airplane, and you could start writing your thoughts down.
You have a second.
So that's one suggestion, is to keep a journal, perhaps keep a smaller one in your bag or in your car. And try to find some time every day to write. Even if it's 10 minutes, 15 minutes, try to find that time.
Well, you know, that makes perfect sense. And the other thing I think that you're really an expert at is to take somebody's writing or somebody's essay and be able to match it with the picture or the photo or the illustration that makes it complete. Tell us a little bit how you look for how to tell the whole story with a graphic.
Well, thank you for calling me an expert. I appreciate that. That is a challenge, actually, because sometimes the piece is not as straightforward in how it should be interpreted. I'm just one person interpreting it.
Right.
So a lot of times it is straightforward, and the author or the writer submits some possible, some photo options, and we will select one. Other times we will look for illustrations, or we have a staff illustrator that we will reach out to and sort of give direction, and she's wonderful and will come up with ideas. Or sometimes it's a nature image, or something more
conceptual.
Correct, exactly, conceptual, and it sort of ties the piece together in a different kind of way, because we do like to keep the art a little bit different so it doesn't get too common, and it sort of rounds the piece out. But
right.
Yes, that's part of the process, is finding the artwork for the
right.
piece.
That's a real knack. So you have grown the magazine from a very tiny, like a Facebook following, a Twitter following. How do you grow the magazine in terms of social media? What is your secret?
So social media is very fun. I enjoy it. It's challenging. It's something that is a learning process for me. Another thing about just reading and learning, and reading a lot of interesting articles about social media and how to reach your audience, to sort of read a lot of other websites and sort of things that are interesting. We do link out to other sites on our social media, such as Facebook and Twitter. If we like an article, we're happy to let our readers read something from another site. So that's been very helpful too, because you form a relationship with those other sites. But what I've noticed too is sort of, we don't just link out to our own pieces, we sort of find different ways throughout the day to reach our audience. So it could be a cartoon, it could be a question, it could be involving them in our monthly Twitter debates on a topic such as, do you share photos of your children online?
Right.
And that seems to really engage the audience and bring a lot of readers that either have come to our site before, they're either coming for the first time, they're bringing a friend. So it sort of has organically grown, but we have tried different things along the way, as you know.
As we know,
Yes.
right. So how often do you publish moms or dads who are brand new, who have never published something before?
We love publishing new authors. We do it quite often, actually, and it's very exciting to send out that acceptance letter and to see the note that comes back from the writer, because it's usually one of those that really makes you smile and makes you happy that you're doing what you're doing. I get a thrill personally when I get to send an acceptance to a first-time writer.
To a first-time writer. What do you think is the future of mom blogs or mom magazines? Is this going to continue with the energy that it has now?
I think the energy has just begun, actually. I think it is growing. I think the social media landscape is constantly changing, and we are learning new things. I think the level of writing is just getting stronger and more, new contributors and new writers. And I think it's kind of exciting where it can go. And so I think it's just begun, actually.
What do you think is this incredible drive for moms to write about their experience as mothers? Because there is a drive.
There definitely is, and I think back to when I was a new mom, and social media and the internet were not something that we really had that was accessible to us. And sort of the freedom that it gives mothers to sort of write on paper their experience and get to share with other mothers. And there's conversation, like with our blog, for example, there's conversation. There are comments on the blog, there are comments on Facebook, and there's sort of back and forth talk, and that's another reason why I love the monthly Twitter parties, because it's a discussion and you're allowing for different perspectives and different voices to join the discussion and sort of talk out two different sides and see where it lands.
So that's interesting. So you mentioned the Twitter parties, which is a question that we offer to our audience of readers, such as, What are some of our,
Well,
it's kind of our debate.
Yeah, for example, the latest one we had was with respect to, do you share photos and or videos of your children on social media? And interestingly enough, there are two very, very distinct and strong viewpoints. I personally do,
Right.
but many people don't, and they feel strongly there's an innate fear of their children's faces being out in social
In the
media.
world,
And the
right.
conversation was really interesting, and I remember you and I actually talked about it after. I went and checked some of my privacy settings, and I learned something from that discussion. It was very interesting hearing the different perspectives.
Right, and I think that's, so you mentioned Twitter parties, and I think our viewers not everybody would know, but Twitter parties are sort of to have a conversation online in a certain number of characters, but we do those once a month, and we come up with topics that are really interesting, we hope, to moms. So tell us about a few others we've done.
Well, we did a very interesting one on the introvert versus the extrovert mom. I am actually an introvert, and so that was another discussion that I found very interesting. Just the idea of how different your parenting is if you are a mother who is an extrovert versus an introvert. I thought that was very interesting, and that was a very lively discussion. Another one we had around the holiday time was with respect to gift giving.
Right.
And, you know, how much is too much? And again, these monthly topics seem to really, each time that we have these parties, I learn something, or I start to think about something in a new way, which is really what we're trying to do with all of our pieces, is to sort of bring these voices and these themes to other mothers to maybe think about something in a way they haven't thought about before.
Right, which is one of the beauties of the internet, because
Yes.
of all these perspectives and voices and so forth. I guess what I'm wondering now is how you go about organizing your time. You're a writer, you're a mother, you're a business person. How do you pull that all together for yourself in terms of managing your time? I'm sure a lot of our viewers are thinking, how does she do all of that?
So I think I have a technique that perhaps isn't like other people, but that's sort of how I roll.
Give us your secret.
I often look at the clock, and I give myself a certain amount of time to do certain things, and that's how I structure my day. Obviously, if it's something related to a child of mine, that will take precedent, and I will go to my son's baseball game and
Right.
find time to do other things. But in general, during the day, I'm very aware of the time. I don't write a list down, but I mentally give myself X amount of time for certain tasks that I'm doing, and I stick to it.
So is it literally a timer?
It's not a timer, but I do look at the clock.
It's
Yes.
literally your
It's
clock.
that is how I do it. Fascinating, right?
It is fascinating. How, no, that really is. And
It's a little tidbit about me.
it's a little tidbit. So you've established yourself and this magazine, and it's growing, and everything's growing. What about you personally? What are your goals going forward?
Well, I always want to do more writing, and that's something that I think of all the things that I'm doing right now, I probably prioritize that the lowest on my ladder, and I'd like to try to find more time to write and publish more essays. So I would say that's the only thing that I'd really like to sort of implement into my timed daily.
Your daily time.
My daily timer. But some days you
Exactly.
just don't have as
You
many
just-
hours as you think you have.
It just doesn't go.
So it sort of doesn't always go down that way.
Why do you want to write so much? What's your motivation?
Writing feels good to me.
It's not hard?
Oh, it's so hard. And maybe that's another reason why
It goes down on the
goes
list.
over there or under there. But writing is very challenging. I admire our writers so much for what they do and their diligence. And we do have contributing guest bloggers on the blog who write monthly for us. And when I get their monthly posts and I read them, I'm so impressed that they can produce a piece of that level every single
Regularly.
Regularly.
Yeah. Oh,
and
yeah.
for a while we had some bloggers that were submitting twice a month, every other week, a blog post that was polished,
Perfect.
that was perfect. I really admire writers. Writing is the hardest thing of all. Well, parenting's pretty hard.
Yeah, parenting is
I
up
would say
there.
parenting, actually.
Yeah, that might be the hardest. Who opted in for this?
Yes,
You know,
it
exactly.
just kind of happened. We're
Exactly. So what other sites outside of sort of mommy sites, what sites are you reading? Like the New Yorker, what do you read online?
Well, I think it changes a lot for me. So, for example, sometimes I will read pieces on The Onion. I will read a piece on the New Yorker. I actually like to laugh, so I'm looking for a little humor when I'm not reading the mommy stuff, which I love to do.
Oh, of course.
And so I'm looking for funny pieces a lot of the time.
So are we in the David Sedaris area of the New Yorker?
Yes,
or what?
it's more Andy Borowitz, actually.
Oh, okay.
So I like my
Interesting.
daily little giggle. I like satire.
Uh-huh.
That's
Do you
what I'm
listen to
reading
The
right
Moth?
now. I've been to the Moth. That was so much fun. I don't do that much listening. I think my
More reading?
my listening is actually music. My reading
Is
when I'm not reading, I like to listen to music.
That's interesting. I feel the same way.
Mm-hmm.
So you've said some of your favorite sites, and of course,
Right now, those are
you
my favorite. It
run
changes.
some of the favorites, and we only have a minute left. So why don't you just give our readers one last snapshot of if you want to be a writer and you're a mother, do this.
If you want to be a writer and you are a mother, make sure you find the time for yourself to write down your thoughts, to practice your writing. It is the hardest thing you could do, but it is like a muscle, and you have to practice and you have to just commit to yourself and commit that time for yourself because you deserve that. And I need to do that more too.
Thank you so much
thank
for
you for
joining
having
us.
me.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Sounds good.